It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. This show is brought to you by SubashTechnosis.com. SubashTechnosis.com is they're an India-based website design, search engine optimization. They do data entry, press release, content writing, any kind of. They'll do customer service for you on your website if you want to have one of those little chat boxes where you chat with customer service. They can handle all those kind of needs for you. A lot of people are having trouble understanding how to spell Subash Technosis. Okay, so Subash is a common Indian name. It's Subash, and then Technosis is Technosis. And you can find the link on OppermanReport.com, also on the blog, and also on the AwakeRadio.us website. Now, also check out OppermanReport.com. This is where we have our special member section. If you like what you hear live here on Friday nights and Saturday nights, then you'll love what you find in the member section because we have additional content, additional shows, and documents, videos, all kinds of additional information for members. And that's what helps support the show, keeps us live here on Friday nights and Saturday nights. We got a great guest today, William Matson Law. He wrote the book. He's another author from Trying Day. I believe he's going to be at the conference coming up in New Orleans. We're going to have to ask him about that. He wrote the book, In the Eye of History, Disclosure in the JFK Assassination Medical Evidence. And we just talked off the air for a couple of minutes, and he's one of these guys that we're going to love. He got all the little details. We're going to love that stuff. So let's introduce here William Matson Law. Mr. Law, are you there?
I am, Ed. How are you?
Very good. I'm very good. And by the way, too, I forgot to thank you off the air for allowing me to book it the last second. You know, we just arranged this yesterday, so thank you very much for stepping up.
Absolutely, anytime.
And you're going to be at the conference in New Orleans?
I am. I'm looking forward to it.
When is that exactly? This is being put on by Chris Milligan and Trying Day Press. It's called OswaldConference.com. What are the dates on that again?
The 14th, 15th, and 16th of October.
14th, 15th, and 16th.
And 16th.
And you get your tickets at at OswaldConference.com. So, Mr. Law, tell us about yourself. Who is William Matson Law?
Well, you know, I'm just a guy that became interested in what happened to President Kennedy after I read a best-selling book many years ago on it. And the theory of the book was that the president's body had been gotten to before his official autopsy. And this idea just grabbed me, but I didn't believe it. I thought, how can something like this happen and we not know about it? And when I had been studying and reading and all that sort of thing for years, and I thought, you know, I'm 40 years old, and I really shouldn't be this obsessed with this case. So I saw a little ad for a conference held in Dallas. The Lancer conference was back then. And I thought to myself, I am going to go to this thing. I'm going to see the people that are interested in this. I'm going to learn all I can from this, and I'm going to put it away, and I'm not going to think about it anymore. Well, that's not what happened. What happened is I went to the conference. I had a wonderful 3 days there. I went to Dealey Plaza and walked around and did all those things, you know, went behind the picket fence. And at the end of it, you know, they weren't talking really about what I want to talk about. What I wanted to talk about was the medical evidence, because I felt if you could talk to people who were there at the autopsy, then the trained medical personnel should be able to tell you whether or not there were shenanigans going on with President Kennedy's body. And so I found myself 3 months after the conference sitting in the living room of Gerald Custer, who was the X-ray technician who took the X-rays of President Kennedy's body. So that's how this whole thing sort of kicked off for me.
And you're only 40 years old, so you weren't even alive when Kennedy died.
No, I was 6.
You were 6, okay. No,
I was 40 at the time. I'm 58 now.
Okay, see, now that makes sense. Okay, yeah, because I'm 53, and okay, right. So I was saying, what about a 40-year-old guy? Because usually 40-year-old guys aren't that interested in Kennedy, you know? Okay, now it makes sense.
Yeah.
58. Okay.
Right.
So now, also, too, by the way, in this book, in the Eye of History, Disclosures in the JFK Assassination Medical Evidence, there's a video included, too, of all your interviews with these people. Is that correct?
What happened was after I had done the book, I thought, well, maybe I should go back, and while I can get these guys all together. Jim Seibert, the FBI agent, was, I think, 83 or 84 at the time in 2002, and I thought, maybe I should try to get these guys on film talking about the autopsy pictures because there's a lot of controversy about that. And so when I called Jim Seibert up, and we'll get more into him later, he said, I really try to stay out of that stuff. I don't really participate in that. But, he wound up doing it for me. So I brought in these guys, most of the ones that were still alive, and we sat around the table and we put the autopsy pictures up on the wall, and we just had a good discussion about it. What was right, what was wrong, their opinions about everything. Now, that film sat on the shelf for some 13 years. I didn't do anything with it until the new edition came out, and then I decided to include the highlights out of that. And so it's almost 2 hours long. So you get a book, and you also get a DVD of me talking to these fellows and them giving their opinions on different things.
Okay, great. So now, what did you find? What kind of anomalies did you find in your investigation?
Oh, Lord. The part that I found hard to swallow was that it had been said that, the president's body had been gotten to before it ever reached Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Right.
So when I contacted Gerald Custer, and he agreed to see me, he had just come back. This is right around the time of the Records Review Board, and he had just come back from the Records Review Board. So he did agree to see me, and so I flew out to Pittsburgh, and I spent 2 or 3 days with him, along with a fellow named Vincent Palamara, whose house I stayed at, who's written a very good book on the Secret Service and their actions and inactions.
Oh, yeah, I had him on the show, yeah.
Case.
I had him on the show.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Great guy.
Yeah.
So Vince agreed to film this, and so he went along with me, and we went to Custer's house. Found him sitting at the table with his wife, and they were just having some dessert as we came in. We introduced ourselves. And now here I am, this guy that said, up till that point, I had been telephoning witnesses in Dallas and things like that over the years. But this was the first time I'd ever met one of these guys that was actually involved in the event. And I was a little starstruck. Here I am meeting Gerald Custer. And it was just, it was a pretty interesting experience. And we set up a room and went back there and filmed part of him talking in front of the camera. And one of the most shocking statements that I heard from him was, I said, well, what do you think happened? And he held up this X-ray, a front X-ray of President Kennedy's head, and he said, I think this guy was killed by a CIA hit squad. Now, that really blew me away. So after coming out of that experience, I just decided to keep going. And I contacted Paul O'Connor. Now, Paul O'Connor was one of the people that was helping the doctors
can we back up
when they brought him in for autopsy.
Can we back up 1 second?
And
wait, who was
sure.
it again? What was the name of the person you said who held up the X-ray and said it was a CIA hit squad?
That was Gerald Custer, the X-ray technician.
Gerald Custer. And what brought him to that conclusion?
I think just by he'd been interviewed before. I think just by delving into this himself, these guys, when they did their job, and they went on with their lives. And then in the 70s, when the House Select Committee was formed, they were allowed to talk to people that wanted to talk to them. Before that, when they left that autopsy, they each had to sign a gag order that prevented them from talking to anyone under threat of hell. So everybody kept pretty quiet about it. They didn't even tell their wives about it. So I think after that, he started studying and people started talking to him. And just, decided that. And, he did x-ray the body, so his opinion has some weight.
Yeah, that's interesting because right out of the box, you got the guy, the x-ray technician who did the x-rays, and he thinks it's conspiracy. So people who say, "Oh, it's these flaky people off in the
right.
in their basement."
That wasn't my first question. That was some, what I try to do is I just try to get them warmed up and if you're nice to a person and they know that you're not out to harm them, that you're not out for sensationalism, you just want to hear the story, then they can get warmed up and they're more likely to talk to you.
I totally.
So that's what I do. And I took my time with that, and then I asked him, what do you think happened? And I about fell off my chair, to tell you the truth, because I really wasn't expecting, conspiracy. I was expecting, I was doing my job, and this is what happened. But I got more than I bargained for. I can tell you that.
Okay, and then what were you getting to when I interrupted you?
Paul O'Connor.
Paul O'Connor.
Paul O'Connor was an assistant that helped the doctors, and his job that night was normally to take, I don't know how graphic you want me to get here, but his job was normally to take the brain out of a deceased person's skull. And when they received the body, he is the one that first came forward and said, we received the body of the president, and it was in a gray metal shipping casket. The body was inside of a body bag, and we unzipped the body bag, put the president's body up on the table, and his head was wrapped in a sheet. He said when they unwrapped the sheet, they said the wound was so massive in President Kennedy's head that the whole room just gasped. And he said the craniotomy that he would normally have to perform was not necessary because the hole was so large in the head that and basically the brains had been blown out so that he had no brain to remove. So this just opened up, a whole can of worms, because he did leave Dallas with a brain. So
O'Connor left.
Take it from there.
O'Connor left with the brain.
No.
Oh.
When maybe I should go back and tell you that when he was brought into Parkland at Dallas Hospital.
Yeah.
They undressed him. They tried to resuscitate him. They were not successful. Some of the doctors said he literally had brain oozing out on the cart. Some said that all of them said his cerebellum was damaged. Now, that sits at the very base of your skull, and it's a different color and a totally different texture from the rest of the brain, so that you can tell the difference between the brain and the cerebellum. They said, one doctor said it was literally swinging in the breeze. Wow. So after they were not successful in saving the president's life, they took a plastic bed liner, lined a casket that was brought in, and wrapped the body in sheets and put the body into the casket. It was a 400-pound casket, display casket. They took it to Andrews Air Force Base. After a fight, Love Field, they went to Love Field. There was a slight scuffle with some Secret Service agents that were going to take the body, and Dr. Earl Rose said, no, you're not. You have to leave it here. He's been murdered here in Texas, and I'm the one that's supposed to perform the autopsy. And they said, no, we're going to run you over if you don't let us out of here. So they took the president's body, took it to Love Field, put it aboard Air Force One. We all know about the famous swearing-in picture where Lyndon Johnson is standing there and Jackie Kennedy's got blood all over her pink suit.
Right.
And they took off and went to Andrews Air Force Base, and from there the body was unloaded and taken for about a 45-minute ride to Bethesda Naval Hospital. Now, this is where it gets weird, because we'll go back to Paul O'Connor now. When they received the body at Bethesda, the body was in a totally different casket, and the body was not wrapped. It was nude inside of a body bag. So there's where we have discrepancies. And, of course, there was no brain when Paul O'Connor said that they received the body.
Now, you interviewed Paul O'Connor.
What's that?
You interviewed Paul O'Connor.
I did interview Paul O'Connor.
And do we have his statement?
I got very close to him over a period of years. So this wasn't like the first interview I did with him. I brought him here to where I live in Oregon and interviewed him over a 3-day period. Wonderful person, gregarious, didn't know a stranger, just a bigger-than-life guy. Now, keep in mind, these guys were like 19 and 20 when this happened to them. They were very young. But he had a vivid memory of all that he did that night.
And do you have him on video, too, as well?
I do.
Okay. Now, this is a really solid witness. He dealt with the body before it was moved, and then he saw the body after it was moved, and it had obviously been tampered with.
Well, you'd have to reach that conclusion. I mean, not only that, Paul O'Connor had started working in funeral homes from the time of 13 years old. So he was no stranger to this kind of thing, and he was able to keep his head and really notice what was going on.
Right.
So we have a guy that is experienced not only in the hospital corpsman work that he'd been doing, and at that point he had helped in or done about 50 to 60 autopsies himself. So he knew what he was doing.
When do you think they had the opportunity to make these changes, to make this tampering?
Well, that's the big crux of the matter, isn't it?
Yeah.
Officially, the honor guard delivers Kennedy's body in an ornate display casket. That would be the one from Dallas at 8 o'clock. But we know from Paul O'Connor and others that the body actually came in this metal shipping casket, just a plain gray metal shipping casket, at around 6:35.
And the casket on the plane next to Kennedy, Jack Onassis, and LBJ. Which one is that? That's the ornate one?
If that's the ornate one, and if we're correct, that casket at some point, either the plane took off. I hate to say this, it sounds ludicrous, but if you follow the trail, if you talk to the people that were there, the casket was empty. They took basically an empty casket to Bethesda. Now, I know this is complicated, but let's go to the people that took the body in at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
That would be Hugh Clark, James Felder, and others. Officially, they brought the casket in at 8 o'clock. Hugh Clark told me, and I've done a book with him recently, so...
that's Betrayal.
Hugh Clark told... That's Betrayal. That's the next book that's coming out. It'll be there at the conference. It'll be available in October. He didn't... When I started questioning him about this, he didn't know anything about, that sort of thing. I had a partner that I was doing a film with by the name of Phil Singer. And Phil Singer is the one that found Hubie. I had, after the book came out, and it had been out several years, I wanted to go back and do something else. And Phil, who had started out as a fan of my work, started talking to me. And we decided that we would get some of the honor guard people together, along with some of the people that were in the autopsy room. We can talk more about that later. But what happened, Hubie said that when they shadowed the motorcade from Andrews to Bethesda, they were in a banana helicopter, and they arrived there 10 to 15 minutes before the ambulance pulled up. So they were supposed to take the ornate display casket around back to the morgue at the loading dock. So what happens is they're standing there, and they're getting ready to move in on the casket to get orders to do whatever they're going to do. Hubie said that this rush of reporters and things came forward, and the ambulance that supposedly contains the body of the president takes off. And so Lieutenant Byrd, who was in command of the whole team, said, get in the pickup truck. So they got in a pickup truck, and they go around to the back of the morgue, but the ambulance is not at the loading dock. So keep in mind, it is November, it is dark, it is cold. They're in the back of this this pickup truck. They have no references to guide them, so they think, well, where is the ambulance? So they go around the complex. They go around maybe 2 or 3 times before they come back around. It's a large complex. They said they were out there at least half an hour. So they're out there running around the complex. They cannot find the ambulance. So on the second or third time around, they see the ambulance backing up to the dock. They get out and they take the ornate display casket into the hospital and leave it at the morgue. Some say they left it at the morgue doors. Some say they took it into the ante room. There's a little cool room where they keep the bodies and things in cold boxes, and so they say that's where they left it, and then they left to go guard the doors at the morgue. So they didn't actually see the body, but that body was supposed to be in there.
Now,
so where would you like me to go next?
Yeah, my question is, it's a good question, is what is your impression of all the people that were there that night who tell you these stories? Was their impression that, hey, this was Keystone cops running around in circles like a bunch of, chickens without heads, or, hey, there's something shenanigans were going on. They were definitely trying to hide this from us. They were avoiding. What impression do you get?
That's basically what I thought I would find, is that I would find, that this was basically just a comedy of errors. But
right.
When you're in a room with a person that's had this experience, and they're looking at you dead in your eyes, and they're telling you this story, you can kind of pick up, if you've done enough of it, you can pick up when somebody is really believing what they're telling you and telling you the truth. And I'm telling you that when I sat down with these guys, and I interviewed each one of them separately, these guys, their stories have the ring of truth. And I have gotten to know them over the years, not just when I first interviewed them. But over the years now, I've really gotten to know these guys for what they are, and they are top-of-the-line guys. They were the best that we had. And they absolutely, the guys in the morgue, they told me the truth. And I'm telling you that I recently have had the opportunity to meet with some of the honor guard that took the official casket in to the morgue at 8 o'clock. And you can't find a better set of fellows. And I had Hugh Clark at this little event I had in Chicago in 2015, where Phil Singer and I sat them around a table along with Jim Jenkins and Jim Metzler and Dennis David, the man who originally gave orders to unload the metal shipping casket. They hadn't seen each other. The honor guard people had not been together at that point in 51 years, and we brought them together for the first time.
Now, I understand you're saying that these are all credible guys, and I'll go along with that. Now, but my question is, what was their impression, though? Was that there was an orchestrated... their impression was that there was an orchestrated...
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, was there an orchestrated conspiracy, or was it just confusion and Keystone cops, people...
No, I don't believe that they believed that it was just a Keystone cops. I think these guys came to understand that there was indeed conspiracy and shenanigans with the president's body. Let me tell you about meeting Jim Jenkins, if we have time for that.
No, plenty of time, yeah.
I over a period of months, I called Jim Jenkins. He was very reluctant. He did talk to me, but I won't say I had to pull things out of him. He did talk to me, but finally, after kind of touching base with him, he agreed to meet with me in New Orleans. So I flew to New Orleans, and I had this sense of dread that he wasn't going to show up, and so I never sleep well the night before an interview. I hadn't had much sleep, and I'm trying to work with this new camera that I had, and part of the piece of the camera was missing, and it was like, one of those days.
Sure.
And finally he calls me, and he says, William, this is Jim. I'm in the lobby. So all that melted away from me. I thought, this is going to be great. I go down to the lobby, and here he is. He's like, 6'3", 6'4". He's got a white hair, matching beard. He looked like he could be a history teacher, he turned around and he saw me. He had his hands deep in his pockets. He was looking at a picture. He turns around and says, "Well, hello, William." And I recognized his voice. We shook hands, went around to a little restaurant where we had some Cokes, and we're sitting there, and I'm talking to him about this, and he says, I found out at the age of 19 or 20 years old that my country was no better than a third world country. He said, I don't trust people, and I don't trust the government, and this was the start of it. Well, now he's just telling me this stuff, and it's fresh, and I'm really excited, but I don't want to have him tell me too much of that. I wanted to capture it on film. So I say to him, well, let's go back up to my hotel room and let's get it on camera. I thought I was going to have a nice time with him because I'd flown a long way. I had visions of going to like a French Quarter, setting up the camera, having a nice lunch, asking him these questions. He says, well, my wife is going to be back in 45 minutes. So now I'm under the gun and I'm pushed. So he looks at me for 10 seconds. It seemed like a century to me. And he says, well, William, I'd just soon sit here and talk to you about it without you filming it. So now my heart falls to my feet, and I must have had a stricken look on my face because he looked at me and he said, all right, William, I'll do it for you. So I said, great. And we went up to the hotel room. I had a rough set of questions. Normally I'd take time to warm up, but he said, I've only got 45 minutes before my wife's back, and then I got to go. So I took these questions. I set the camera up. I got light into the room. I opened the curtains, set the camera up, took these rough set of questions, and just started asking questions. Ask the question, get the answer. Ask the question, get the answer. And at one point, I'm sitting there. Now, where he's in conflict with Paul O'Connor is that he said he was handed a brain that night. He said he did see the tip of the casket coming through the door. He was not near the casket at that point. He was back some ways into the morgue. So, but he did say that Paul helped take the body out of the casket. And he said, but when he was at the doctor's elbows, he said he was next to, I can't remember whether it was Boswell or Humes, but he said the looking at the head wound, he said where some of the fractures were, the head was basically totally fractured. It was like if you dropped an egg, a hard-boiled egg on the floor, that's what the skull was like, and it was fractured all over. So he said Boswell took the brain out, and he handed it to, I guess he took it to the brain bucket, but before that he took the brain out. He said the brain did have damage, but he said not as much damage that you would expect the brain to have from the damage to the skull. And he said, I said, well, did you see him take the brain out? He said, well, I just remember that I saw Boswell with this brain, and he said he made a comment. And I said, well, what was the comment? And he looks at me and he says, what I think he said was, that damn thing fell out in my hand. He said, the arteries on the brain, you have arteries that come off your brain from blood and fluid and things like that.
Yeah.
The brain just does not rattle around in your head. There's a procedure that you have to do to take this off. And even if President Kennedy's head was laid open like that, it would basically still be connected to the spinal cord. And there's a procedure you have to do, without being graphic for the audience, to take this brain out. He said the brain doesn't rattle around. So he said that one of the doctors said, that damn thing fell out of my hand. And I said, well, what does that mean to you? And he said, well, what I think that means is that the brain was removed and then replaced. Now I'm sitting here across the table from him, and I almost fell off the chair. I was not expecting him to tell me that, but it was a mind-blowing experience, I can tell you that.
Now, let me ask you a question. Now, where could they have gotten another brain from in such short time, unless they brought it with them before the assassination? Just where?
Well, there was you have to know the morgue. Okay. And in the morgue there was a room where they kept brains. It would have been no problem to get a brain.
And there's no inventory on
I don't know. Now, I'm not claiming that that's where they got the brain from. I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm just the guy that comes and talks to these people and then reports it back.
But you would hope there's an inventory on these brains. People are just walking in and out, taking brains and, dropping off different brains, especially when the president's, but, oh, my God.
Well, there's a story
Yeah.
and it's not a story. It's been confirmed that when they were bringing in the casket, now this is the official casket, I think. I have to back up and tell you that there are 3 different casket entries, and this is where it gets really strange. You have the one at 635 to 640. That would be the cheap metal shipping casket. You have the FBI's version that goes from, they delivered the casket to the back of the morgue at 7:17, and then you have the official entry at 8 o'clock delivered by the same casket, not the shipping casket, but the ornate casket. You have that casket delivered at 8 o'clock. Now, it's been said that when they went into the morgue, there was a little table with a lump on it, and one of the FBI agents said, "What is that?" And somebody told him that it was a baby that was going to be buried at Arlington. So some people have speculated that's where they got the brain from, but I don't think they'd have to do that because they already had a brain room, and you could, if you really were, part of this thing, you could had brains there. So did it come from inside the hospital? I don't know. Wasn't there.
Okay.
Can't tell you. I just know that there were shenanigans going on.
Okay, gotcha. Now, before we go to a commercial break, I got a couple of quick questions for you. Because you talk about you're flying down to New Orleans and stuff. How are you funding all your investigations? Like, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm retired now, but I write now full time. But at the time, I had a publisher, and they paid for part of it, and I paid for part of it out of my pocket. It wasn't. You got to understand, this was about obsession. This wasn't like I'm going to do this and get famous and make a whole bunch of money. This was such an obsession for me. I had to find out what had happened. Try to come as close to the truth as I could. So I mean, I was laying out all kinds of money for this thing, which caused a frown on occasion from my wife at the time.
All right. I bet. Okay. All right. Let's take a commercial break, and we'll be back with more of William Matson Law. And the main book we're talking about right now is In the Eye of History, Disclosures in the JFK Assassination Medical Evidence. Now, Mr. Law is going to be down there at the Oswald Conference in New Orleans, October 14th, 15th, and 16th. And he has a new book coming out, too, called Betrayal, which mostly deals with the honor guard. So we'll be back with more of William Matson Law after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. Did you know that 30% of all people on online dating websites and personal ads are either married or in a monogamous relationship? 30%. If you suspect that your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend may be cheating online, go to emailrevealer.com and our online infidelity investigation. You give us their email address, and we could trace it back to online personal ads, dating sites, and social networks. We can even expand the investigation and find them cheating on escort service sites, or even porn sites if they're registered to porn sites and swinger sites. So check out emailrevealer.com if you suspect your spouse is cheating, and check out our online infidelity investigation. William Ramsey is a producer here at the Opperman Report, and he's just come out with a new book, Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. Now, he just sent me a copy of this book. Oh, boy, it's about 2 inches thick. And there's a chapter on just about everybody in this book that you can imagine. The Beatles, and Jack Parsons. Everybody's in here. It's incredible. And I definitely recommend this book. There's a bunch of pictures in here, too, of all these people and different chapters and information. Anton LaVey and people I've never heard of, too. There's a whole bunch in here. JFC Fuller. I don't know who he is. But it's great stuff. by our producer here, William Ramsey. So check out Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow over Humanity. You can find it on Amazon.com, or you could find it in the OppermanReport.com bookstore. We have an urgent bulletin. It seems that the group Strawman is still on the loose. It has been confirmed that Strawman are Canadian, okay, and that authorities are asking people to stay indoors, lock your doors and windows until this group can be dealt with. You could find more information about this group of Canadians, at strawmanmusic.com. You can have your ad played here. Okay, we're looking for sponsors. Okay, in fact, we desperately need sponsors right now to take this show to the next level. So you can have your your ad played here, read live, like I'm doing now, so artfully. Or we can even work up a little jingle for you with some music and stuff like that and play it here. You have no idea how inexpensive it would be to have your ad played on the Opperman Report on 7 stations. Live Friday night, and another 7 stations live on Saturday night, plus replayed every day of the week on different stations, and then archived on YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and all different kinds of podcasts, Pod This and Podbean, all different kinds of places who archive the show for us. And on those archives, your ad would play indefinitely, forever. You also get a little banner on OppermanReport.com. You get a mention on the air. You get a little interview on the air, and all kinds of fun stuff if you sponsor Opperman Report. We have an opportunity to get this show on a major AM/FM station in California. We've been approved. So if you want to sponsor us into that, so incredibly inexpensive that your ad would be heard by a the range covers 5 million people in population where your ad would be broadcast, and all these other stations would be thrown in for free. So really affordable prices to sponsor OppermanReport.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You can get a copy of that book at emailrevealer.com, or you can get a copy of that book now. It's back up on Amazon.com. How to Become a Successful Private Investigator by Ed Opperman. And this book has been updated a little bit from the previous book that we had that was available to our wonderful listeners. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Once again, the show is brought to you by SubashTechnosis.com. We're here with William Matson Law. Wrote the book In the Eye of History, Disclosures in the JFK Assassination Medical Evidence. He's going to be at the OswaldConference.com. That's put on by Chris Milligan over at Trine Day in New Orleans, Louisiana. October 14th, 15th, and 16th. Tickets are still available at OswaldConference.com. And he's going to also have for sale his book, Betrayal, which is his interview of the Honor Guard. That'll be over there in New Orleans there. So, Mr. Law, you had some other stuff you wanted to tell us about the 2 FBI agents.
Well, let's talk about the 2 FBI agents. Frank O'Neill and James Seibert were ordered by J. Edgar Hoover to stay with the body and not leave it. And when they go into the morgue, watch the autopsy, and when they found evidence, they were to take that evidence back to the FBI laboratory. Now, it gets interesting with them because let me tell you how I managed to get through them first. I knew from reading tons of documents and things where there had been people that had said, had written students saying, I want to write a paper, I need to talk to you about your participation, and they would all get rebuffed. So I knew I had to come up with some sort of plan. So I was working on the manuscript at the time, and I managed to locate. I guess it was O'Neill that Jim Seibert that I located first. And when I contacted him, I asked him, if you were the fellow that was in the autopsy room, and he said, yeah, that was me. And to my surprise, he was willing to answer some questions. And they had written in their report called an FD 302, federal document FD 302, which is the report that each person has to write up, each team has to write up when they've had one of these experiences. And in this FD 302 was a statement they had made that said there has been surgery in the head area, there's been a tracheotomy performed, as well as surgery in the head area, namely in the top of the head. Well, that caused all sorts of speculation over the years about, surgery of the head area. What does that mean? Because there was no surgery done in Dallas. They had put some fluids in his body. They had done some cut down on his ankle. They had a couple of little cuts in his chest to put chest tubes, but no surgery was done. They cleaned the body up and wrapped him up in sheets, and the rest of the story. But this had caused a whole bunch of speculation. So I just started off, basically right away saying, I'd like to know about, the FD 302 of the statement that you made surgery of the head area. Jim Seibert said, well, I wish we would have worded that better. It would have saved some confusion in books. And I tried to talk to him about, I'm writing this book. I'd like you to be part of it. And he said, I'm not really willing to sit for an interview. He said, I don't have any stars in my eyes. I dropped some of the first bombs over Europe during the war. So it was difficult for him to get him to talk to me. But he was open, he was friendly, and he said, I'll tell you what, if you can come up with a list of questions the next time you call, I will try to answer it for you. So I was really excited about that. And so I asked him for the number of his partner, Frank O'Neill, and he looked in his Rolodex and he gave it to me. So I called Frank O'Neill and I introduced myself, and he was pretty abrupt. And he said, I said, I'm working on this book. I'd like you to be part of it. And he said, well, I'll have to give that some thought. But he said, I'm going to call James Seibert right now, as soon as I hang up from you. And he said, you call me back in a week, and maybe I'll give you the interview. So I gathered what testimonies I had of the two of them, and I waited the week, and I really felt that I had connected to Jim Seibert. I thought that, we'd really gotten along. He was quite friendly, and he'd even offered me a picture of himself for my book. So I waited the week, and I called him back, and I got him on the phone, and I burbled, hello, Mr. Seibert, this is William Law, and there was silence, and he said, yes. And I said, remember you said if I called back with a list of questions that you'd answer. And he said, I am going to be answering these questions till I'm 90. He was real abrupt. He said, you're just going to have to wait till they release these things and all these documents, and then you'll understand these things. So I knew I was going to lose him, so I thought, well, I'll just ask a question. I'll try to keep him on the line. And I said, Mr. Seibert, can I just ask one question? And there was silence, so I went on. And I said, did the president's body look like what you remembered in the autopsy pictures? And he said, well, it was cleaner than what I remembered. I don't remember anything being that clean. And so I keep him on as long as I can, and then I decided to call Frank O'Neill. So I call up Frank O'Neill, and I've decided not to give you the interview. Now, obviously, when I first called Jim Seibert, Frank O'Neill had called him and said, look, I don't want you talking to this guy. At the time, he was writing his own book. So he shut me down as far as being able to talk to either one of them. And he said, I've decided not to give you the interview. Well, I don't take no for an answer a lot of times. And I said, well, could I just ask you one question while I've got you on the line? And he says, I've already decided not to give you the interview. I've told you that. But then he said, go ahead. So I said, did the pictures of the president look like what you remembered in the autopsy photographs? And he said, some of them did, some of them didn't. I pushed it, and I said, did the president's body look like you remembered? And he said, no. Well, I've asked my question he's obviously not going to give me the interview. So I went, all right, thank you, Mr. O'Neill, and I hung up. Now, I kept working on the book, kept doing interviews. It took me quite a while to get it all together. And as it was about to go to press, I thought, I've got to give, one more shot at trying to get these guys to talk to me. So by now I have a full manuscript. And in the manuscript was their names. Gerald Custer had mentioned, that he was with Seibert and O'Neill, and they were attached to his hip, and I decided to use this to get in to ask more questions. So I hadn't talked to these guys in 3 years, but I did manage to talk to them. I talked to Frank O'Neill first. Now, keep in mind, 3 years have gone by since I first talked to them. Now, Frank O'Neill was short and clipped and didn't sound very friendly. So I was with trepidation that I called this guy, right? So I called him up. He answered the phone. I introduced myself. I didn't bother to tell him I've called you 3 years before. I just introduced myself. I said, I'm writing this book. I know that you were involved in the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination. And he said, yeah, that was me. And much to my surprise, he seemed a little glad to hear from me. He was friendly. He answered some questions I had for him. I did ask him, I said, did the president's body look like what you remembered? And he said, oh, there were just some pictures that looked slightly different. And he said, other than that, it looked the same. So he didn't basically tell me the same thing that he told me the first time. So I came up with this little plan of finding a reason to call him every 2-3 weeks. I'd let a month go by. And so at the end of this whole thing, where I sent him some documents he wanted, and that opened the doors for me, and I was able to just call him and get all my questions answered, or most of them. He still would not let me come out and interview him, but he did answer my questions over the phone, and it was a really interesting time. And so next I called Jim Seibert, and I did the same thing. After I was totally done talking and getting everything I could out of Frank O'Neill, I called Jim Seibert and told him who I was, did not mention the phone call of 3 years prior. He answered my questions. I did the same thing. I found a reason to call him every few weeks. And then at the end of this thing where he was answering my questions, I sent him some books on the assassination, because I had come to learn that he was interested in the literature, and he knew quite a bit about it. And so I sent him some books. This opened up a pathway for me, because as soon as he got the books, he called, and when I got home from work one evening, my wife at the time said, you got a call today from Jim Seibert? And so I said, oh, my God, Jim Seibert called me. So he called me back and said, I got those books. I wasn't expecting anything like this. Good night. So we had a nice conversation, and I thought, well, I've pretty much asked everything I can ask. So I thought, it's never been done before. I'm going to give it a try. And I said, I'm trying to do this book, but I need to write about you. But it's hard to write about a person if you've never met them. And there's some people that live in your area that had to do with the assassination. And if I ever get down that way, could I come and interview you? Jim Hosty lived down there, and he was the FBI agent that was supposed to be watching Oswald at the time Kennedy was killed. And so I used that, and I heard him go, no. And I thought, well, I've blown that one. I'm holding my breath. And when I hear him say no, then I thought, well, I've blown that. The opportunity's over. And then I heard him say, no, I wouldn't mind.
Whoa. Jackpot.
So, I'd hit the jackpot. Yeah. So I immediately booked the plane, called him back within the week and said, I'm on my way down there. And so he said, fine, I'll come pick you up from the hotel. And so it was a really wonderful experience. Now, I took Deborah Conway, who ran Lancer Publications at the time, with me, because I had a plan. And what I didn't ask him if I could camcord the interview. I didn't want to scare him off. I knew he didn't even give interviews, and I had pushed my luck with this about as far as I could go. And so I had a little plan. And at the hotel room, having breakfast, I had this little kit bag with me, and I had a little film camera in it. and I also had a tape recorder. And I said, now, Deborah, here's my plan. I said, we're gonna get to Jim Seibert's office, and when we do, I'm going to say to him, would you mind if I camcord this? And if he says no to me, I want you to take this little sound recorder, and I want you to give it to, say, I've got this tape recorder, William, if this will help you. And if he says no to that, then just sit in a corner and write as fast as you can. So he gets there. He's straight back. He's like 83 years old at the time. His hair is silver white. He's straight appearance, clean cut guy. Takes us both out to his car, and is proceeding to take us to his home. So with him, he brought his little wife, and I'm thinking to myself, as I'm sitting in the back seat staring at the back of Seibert's head, I thought, how in the hell am I going to ask this guy if there was a brain inside President Kennedy's head? So we're driving along, and I said something along the lines of, Mr. Seibert, I'm so glad that I could be here with you because you had your hands on the body of the president. You saw what happened, and you could tell me. And his little wife, Esther, turns around, and she says, well, his brains were all blown out of his head. So now here's confirmation for Paul O'Connor that there was no brain inside the head. And his little wife just blurts this out. And I said, well, that was going to be one of the questions I was going to ask. So finally we get into his home office there. And he says, who wants to write? And because he knew I was going to take notes. And I said, would you mind if I camcord this? And he said, no, go right ahead. Ooh. So I didn't need to go through any of my little spiel. I just set this little camera up, and we taped it, and we were there for 12 hours. He took us to dinner at they lived in this complex at the time that had, was assisted living, but it was very posh, and it had its own restaurant, its own barbershop, and its own weight room and beauty shop. Everything they needed in the hospital was across the road there, and they were very proud of it. Took us on a tour of the complex and took us on a tour of the hospital, and basically answered all my questions, and that's all in the book.
Incredible, my friend. Incredible stuff. Now, let me ask you a question. And when you go down to this conference, this Oswald conference, on October 14th, 15th, and 16th in New Orleans, what's your presentation going to be? Is there anything that's going to be in your presentation that you haven't told us here today? Well,
there's so much in the book that it's hard to, in an hour's interview, you can't really get everything that you want to talk about. I've updated the book. I did a short history of Oswald and some of the weirder things that was going on with him. If people delve into Oswald's background, most people do not do this other than people like me, and some of the weirdness that was going on back then and how he managed to wind up on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. It's really quite amazing. It's remarkable stuff. I'm going there because this is basically, Betrayal is basically Hubie's book. I wrote it with him, and he's going to be there, by the way, in New Orleans, as is Jim Jenkins, who participated in President Kennedy's autopsy, and Dennis David, who was the person that gave the orders to take the gray metal shipping casket into the morgue at 635.
Will they be presenting, or they're just attending?
No, they're going to be presenting with me. We'll be talking, and we'll be glad to take questions. I'm gonna show some footage of film that's not been seen. When I had this little conference in Chicago along with Phil Singer in 2015, we had the whole thing taped. I had the room mic'd, and we had 5 or 6 film cameras there because I wanted to make sure, because this was a historical event, I wanted to make sure that it was all going to get captured. And so I'm working on a documentary on that at the present time. But I'm going to be showing clips from that. So people that are interested in this thing should really find it really interesting. I mean, this was the first time that the honor guard had seen each other in 51 years.
Yeah, this is incredible stuff, and I really appreciate your work, too. This is really, really good work. And I like your style, too, the way it reminds me a lot of myself, too. You try to get these interviews. Yeah, I know. So I don't know if that's a compliment or a criticism.
You know, the thing is that I get pretty enthusiastic about this stuff. Right. I can't help it. It just seemed at some point to take over my life, you know? I've been doing this about 25 years now. And it hasn't abated. It's I think about it all the time. I'm talking to people that, you know, either had something to do about it or just want to talk to me. I mean, some of my own family will, you know, run from the room if I start to talk about it. Their eyes glaze over because they've had to live with me. But to me, you know, this is not just a puzzle to me. I think we all lose sight of the people that are in this that really want to find out what happened to our president. I sometimes think that we forget that a man lost his life that day. So I try to keep that in mind when I'm interviewing people to this event because, you know, it's a historic event. Yes, it is. But there are actually people, you know, that are still here with us that actually had to live with this and saw this man killed in front of their eyes. So I am enthusiastic about it, but I treat it with the respect that it deserves. I know that every time I ask somebody that was in this event, I'm asking them to walk me through their own personal nightmare. So I try to be very respectful and very careful when I'm interviewing, unless I have to push, and I will push if I have to. You know,
sometimes you have to. Sometimes you know, and
sometimes you have to.
Toward the end, you know, you just wait till the end. You know, you got nothing to lose.
And I
start pushing,
and I did do that when I talked to Clint Hill. Yeah. I talked to Clint Hill a few times, and I found myself pushing the line. And that stuff is in the new material in the Eye of History.
William Matson Law, we're going to have you back, okay? Maybe after the conference.
Anytime.
Thank you so much. Okay, William Matson Law, in the Eye of History, disclosures in the JFK medical evidence. And again, Mr. Law, thank you so much for the last second helping me out here, okay?
I enjoyed it, my friend. Thank you very much.
Have a good day. Okay, well, I better just drop the show. Okay.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by New World Mexican Women. Now, they don't have a website. It says New World Mexican Women. You have to Google New World Mexican Women, and their page will come right up. And it's just these women in Mexico. They have a collective. They make jewelry. They write books. They have videos on how to make authentic Mexican jewelry. So check them out. They're great supporters of the show, great friend of the show. So keep in mind the New World Mexican Women. And if you have any kind of deal you want to make with wholesale jewelry coming up from Mexico, these are the people to talk to. If this is the first time you're listening to our show, check out OppermanReport.com. And you'll find in there our members section where we have all kinds of exclusive content that you won't hear on Friday nights and you won't hear it on Saturday nights. It's only available through the subscribing members who subscribe to the show month after month, and that's what keeps us alive here. Also, too, donations. We always take donations, too, at OppermanReport@gmail.com. Okay, today we have Vincent Palamara. He's got a brand new book, JFK from Parkland to Bethesda, The Ultimate Kennedy Assassination Compendium, which is supposed to be like a whole big compilation of all the different JFK facts and figures and documents and all that stuff. Which Vince, how big is this book? It must be like a truckload to have everything JFK in it.
Yeah, actually, it focuses on the medical evidence, so it definitely brings in about the magic bullet by default and various areas about like the smell of gunpowder in Dealey Plaza and the people that saw the smoke and other, very important, albeit peripheral matters. But it's mainly on the medical evidence. But what it entails, it's the first time it's ever been done. That's when people think, 50 years later, what can be done new in this case? Well, it compiles every single statement the Parkland doctors and nurses and other people from that end of the line saw and heard, everything they ever said in chronological order, coupled with the people of Bethesda in Maryland where the autopsy was done and what they said. Because what I found through the years is there's a lot of important books in the medical evidence, but they're very frustrating. They'll make little blanket statements, little hyperbole. They'll say, 20 doctors and nurses said the back of the president's head was gone, indicating the shots came from the front. And they only, have a few examples. They move on to something else. And I was like, boy, to really strengthen the case, it'd be really good from a lawyer standpoint, historian standpoint, to get every statement known to mankind and even do some original research, which I did. I ended up contacting a lot of these people, including one major coup, one doctor that was never contacted by anybody else before. I'll get to that in a second. So again, what it does is it gives the reader, the interested person, whatnot, an opportunity to go, every statement Dr. Kem Clark ever said about the wounds, I want to see that now for the first time you can, as opposed to these blanket statements in books that are very frustrating. They're tantalizing but frustrating because they don't go into enough detail, in my opinion. This is the first time you get the details. It's everything with the kitchen sink when it comes to the medical evidence. But to go back to your first part of your question, yeah, it does by default get into other areas of the case, but it doesn't get into like Cuba, the mafia, all that stuff. That's for other people. I wanted to really stick with the hard medical evidence because, in my opinion, the medical evidence is the most important aspect of the case, and it's also the most confusing. So this is like a GPS, a roadmap through all that. Yeah.
You know what? That's great, and that's perfect for my audience too, because the people who listen to this show, they love to see the original documents, the witness statements. They want all the research. They want all the meat.
You'll get it. It's all meat there. It's not. In fact, the second book, the first book, has a decent amount of narrative by myself. This book is almost exclusively void of narrative. It's literally a reference book. And I go to great pains to tell people it's a reference book. It's kind of the equivalent of an encyclopedia, a dictionary. It's not something you take to the beach, but it's very important because getting rid of all that narrative is good because you get just the meat and potatoes. You don't get 200 pages of yada, 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 reminiscent about what I think about the case and my own spin on things. There's no spin. It's literally what all these doctors and nurses and important people saw, thought, heard, and put down for history. And again, it's all in one place. So it really strengthens the case of conspiracy because now you have specific names in chronological order of everybody that said everything and some very more important corroborating details. One thing I'll say is, like I mentioned earlier, his name's Dr. William Zedlitz. And his name was mentioned briefly during the Warren Commission hearings. I believe it was Dr. White, Martin White, who mentioned him in passing. And I don't know if it was intentional error or whatnot, but his name was misspelled. They put an extra E in there. So all these years, for whatever reason, no one ever contacted the guy. He was never interviewed for any book, private research, or nothing. And just by happenstance, in 1998, way back when, 18 years ago, I ran across a William Zedlitz online, a little country doctor in Texas. I wonder if this is that guy. And I sent him a letter, and he basically confirmed, no one's ever contacted me before. And it's in the book, but basically he corroborates the case for conspiracy. He says the back of the president's head was gone. The throat wound appeared to be an entrance wound. He's very matter-of-fact about it. And obviously a guy was never looking for money or fame. This guy was never contacted by anybody, has never done anything with it since, pretty much. He just basically been kept to his own, self out there. That's another thing, too. The vast majority of these people, in fact, I'd really want to say 99% of them, have never looked for a quick buck, and they're not doing anything there. They've been country, doctors all these many decades, and it's only because of people like me and other people have contacted them that begrudgingly or whatnot, they've released their information. But a lot of times they're just continuing on their lives, saving people's lives, caring for people. It just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on your perspective on things. That horrible day in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963, and obviously later that night at Bethesda, Maryland. So it's really good to have that all together. So that's the second book. The first book's on the Secret Service, and we can get into the third book too, but just to let everybody know, yeah.
All right, tell you what, before we get into that, why don't you tell us about Vince Palamara? Palamara.
Palamara.
Tell us who Palamara is, too, while you're at it. But Vince Palamara, tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, a lot of people say I don't look it, but I'm 49 going on 50, which actually in some respects is a young one in this case. And to make a long story very short for your listeners, basically my interest in this case began, believe it or not, when I was age 12, which takes us to 1978. This is a short story. This is not a big, long harangue, but it's important to show the sequence of events. Yeah, when I was 12 years old, it was the Haas Select Committee. It was the reinvestigation of the JFK assassination. And, the Warren Commission was the first one that found Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. There was no conspiracy. Well, the second one found there was a probable conspiracy, sort of hinted about the mafia, but very frustratingly kind of left it at that. But keep in mind, for a very impressionable young preteen that I was always one that stuck out in school that, wow, you really like to read. Wow, you're really into history. A lot of my peers weren't into that, especially at a young age, and I was just loved it. And my parents, who are still with us, doing really good, by the way, they were ardent Kennedy admirers. So everything came together like a synthesis. My mom and dad loved President Kennedy. Every once in a while, even at that early age, would mention him. I started getting the stamps and coins with his image on there. And then lo and behold, the Haas Select Committee had their findings, and it was on the nightly news, little snippets about what they found and the hearings and whatnot. I became hooked. So for the first 10 years or so, it was more just like reading other people's work. I did 0.0 original research. But the 25th anniversary really hit me for some reason. It really just lit a fire under me to say, you know what, I'm going to do something original on this. Didn't know exactly what, but I said, I'm just too interested to let this go. I mean, I had a life, a job like everybody else, blah, 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 but I was interested. Well, what happened was, again, that's why I have to tell this little story, because some things that might sound like they're not related actually have a big play on things. I think you can go this with anybody's background. Well, I was interested in a fictional show on the Secret Service called The Wild Wild West. A lot of your listeners probably know about it. They know about that Will Smith movie, which I don't like, but I won't go there. But I love the original series of Robert Conrad and Artemis Gordon. Again, it's a fictional show, but it's on the Secret Service. When I started getting into the Kennedy assassination, not just the man and his administration, but the assassination, I started to look at the Secret Service, the agents, the men around the president, where everyone's looking at Kennedy. I was always looking at these gentlemen. I was intrigued about who they were. I started to find who these gentlemen were, whatnot. And I just it wasn't a totally original thing at the beginning, but I was like, wow, you know what, conspiracy or no conspiracy, this man should have been protected better. If he would have been protected, we wouldn't be arguing whether Oswald did it or not. The gentleman would have lived. And I was really frustrated by that. I think about the Truman assassination attempt. Truman lived. The Reagan assassination attempt. Reagan lived, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when I really started to get going. Again, this is a short story because this isn't going to be year to year. There's little points here. In 1991 was my very first major conference, and it was the third decade. I was 24 going on 25. And everybody in the audience was like old enough to be my father or grandfather. And I did a short presentation on the Secret Service, and it went over tremendously. I had people come up to me saying, boy, I guess that's why they call the Secret Service secret. I never paid attention to that before. I think you're really onto something. You should really do some of this. And that's when I began contacting these gentlemen. Keep in mind, this is before the internet. There was computer bulletin boards, but for all intents and purposes, the average person, including myself, didn't know about the internet and whatnot. So it was the old newspaper archives, microfiche, directory assistants, a lot of luck. And I found a lot of these gentlemen, former agents, and I started to question them. And they were tickled pink. Keep in mind, at the time, my voice was even higher, and I was 24, 25, and they were like, hey, some young whippersnapper. This isn't going anywhere, because I didn't even think I was going to be writing a book at the time. I got to, tell people that, too. Well, the big moment. Everybody says, what was the big moment? Okay, we got your bio. Tell me about the one moment that really changed things for you in a positive way in this case. What made you really, really want to do it besides just an interest? Because everybody can have an interest. Anybody can read a book. What separates you from the person who just reads and is interested? What did that was September 27th, 1992, a day to live in infamy for me. I spoke to the head of JFK's White House detail, Gerald Bain, last name spelled B-E-H-N. And I asked him matter-of-factly, I was on the fence at the time about some of these stories that alleged that President Kennedy had ordered the men off the car, didn't want the bubble top, et cetera, et cetera. I was on the fence about it. I was skeptical. I had nothing to go on that there was anything wrong with that. So I just matter-of-factly ran it by him thinking he's going to corroborate it, didn't think anything of it. And he told me, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the car. If you look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there from time to time. I went numb. I couldn't believe he was telling me this. This is the number one agent. This is like Douglas MacArthur, not some buck private. This is the number one agent who had Kennedy's ear, also had Johnson's ear. He was in the Secret Service from 1939 to 1967. One of the most, still to this day, one of the most respected agents of the service. I couldn't believe he was telling me this. It was flabbergasted. Luckily for history, he consented to being recorded, so I had this on audio tape, and the gentleman passed away about 7 months later of cancer. So thank the Lord that I contacted him, asked this question. I was flabbergasted. Now, when I got calm, like a couple of days later, I said, wait a minute, you got to be skeptical, Vin. I always think of as a skeptic. Someone's going to say, you know what, Vin, this is a senile old man, even though he sounded very lucid, very together. Hey, he could just be one guy. Maybe he's mistaken. You got to get corroboration. And boy, did I get corroboration. This is what led to my first book, Survivor's Guilt, the Secret Service and the Failure to Protect the President. From that point on, from 1992, you could argue even to the present time, but we'll say up to like a few years ago when the book came out, 2013, I started to contact all these gentlemen, every possible former agent who protected Kennedy I could find, including White House aides and whatnot. Everybody consented to being audio taped. I did that. If not, I got it in writing or both. Sometimes I got lucky. Whatnot, the agents would go on the record. And it was like a cue card. They were from different parts of the country. And a lot of times they didn't know I contacted their comrades. And they were telling me the same thing over and over again. President Kennedy never ordered us to do anything. Never ordered us off the car. Oh, he didn't order the bubble top off. Oh, that's a myth. Oh, here's a very nice man. Never interfere with. They said that so many times. It was like you're reading cue card. He never interfered with us at all. So the $64 million question for your listeners is, wait a minute. I read the Warren Report. I read William Manchester. I read Jim Bishop. I'm reading my history books in high school and college. They claim President Kennedy didn't want that security. So it's a shame Oswald acted alone, or there was a conspiracy. Take your pick. But, President Kennedy kind of had it coming. He didn't want that security there. Just the way it was meant to be. It was fate. When you find out it's not true, that puts the onus on the Secret Service. That raises alarm bells of suspicion that security was stripped. At the very least, it's gross negligence of the Secret Service. At worst, it's conspiratorial workings to undermine the security to make sure the shot or shots happen. And again, just taking the most conservative view of this, if there's people out there that believe Oswald acted alone in the minority, well, that would have been prevented in its gross negligence. That's the most conservative spin you can put on this. And it was very valuable because a lot of these gentlemen in the intervening years passed away through attrition. They're older gentlemen, they passed away. So it's like for history, I got Sam Kinney, the driver of the FOB car, on the record. Other top associates, Gerald Bain, the head of the White House detail, on the record. A lot of the agents who were in Dallas, very important, on the record, and other trips. And they all tell me the same thing. And I also compared out, I got a lot of documents out of the National Archives that were available because the Assassination Records Review Board, it was created because of the Oliver Stone movie and all the uproar, some millions of documents were released. And in the late 90s on, I got a lot of these Secret Service reports, ones that weren't destroyed by the Secret Service. We'll get into that in a moment. In 1995, they destroyed a lot of the Secret Service trip reports for trips in this late summer and fall of Kennedy's, trips he was taking before his death. And I said to myself, wait a minute, how come on this trip he had really good security? He had a lot of motorcycles around the car. He had agents on the back of the car, or at least agents running with the car, whatnot. And that was the genesis of the book. Again, the first book is called Survivor's Guilt, the Secret Service and the Failure to Protect the President. I always use the original title, The President. It's actually President Kennedy. But yeah, that's what that is. So that's a big thumbnail sketch of that book. That was was amazing. And we'll go into more specifics about things I've uncovered there if you want. No problem at all. But
I would. I got a question for you first. Now, all your contact with the Secret Service, have you ever had any kind of blowback from them? Any kind of opposition to you?
Oh yes,
yeah,
big time. Yeah,
go ahead.
I had an angry call. It was funny after I made that call. That was just no other way to put it. I went numb. I could not believe Gerald Bain's telling me this. I was thinking, thank God I had this on tape. Could you imagine? No one would believe it. Oh, you're just some conspiracy buff. How do we know he really said that? Thank God I got it on tape. There it is. Him telling me President Kennedy never wore the agents off the car is amazing. Well, I contacted a couple of others. I was so buzzed by him telling me this. I was so inspired. I contacted everybody I could before they were comparing notes during those next 3 days. Well, on the third day, it was like basically September 30th, 1992, I got an angry call from Hamilton Brown, who at that time was the executive secretary of the Former Agents Association. Even though they're retired, just like the CIA and other organizations, they have little reunions and whatnot.
Yeah.
And he told me to cease and desist from contacting any more of my associates. I gave you no authority to do so. He was really angry. He even called my parents because evidently he found out I used my parents' number. And just basically, there was no threat of legal action because there's nothing wrong with the First Amendment, free citizen. I'm allowed to do what I want. But it's basically a shot across the bow to try to scare a young guy to maybe stop doing this or whatnot. And after a couple of days, I said, wait a minute. It's a free country. I'm not harassing anybody. I called. I was very polite and nice, and they were nice, and they responded back. And I only talked to them one time. It wasn't like I'm harassing them or nothing. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody can do that. It's only when you call a second time, if they don't want it, you can get in trouble, whatnot. And that's when I started to contact more guys. I got more bold, and some of these guys are telling me, hey, who died and made him boss? It's a free country. You're allowed to talk to me if you want. So I was emboldened by that. But, through the years, I got other things. Quite frankly, I've had a couple occasions where my mail's been opened.
Yes, man. Oh, yes. Boy, go ahead.
No doubt. Yeah, I'm telling you right now, only the Secret Service letters, former agents, they were open, slit down the sides. None of my other mail was ever taken or open, but those former agents' letters were. Interestingly enough, the letters appeared to be not tampered with, but they obviously took a look to see what the heck was inside. Probably wondering what this young kid's doing. And after 9/11, the Patriot Act, whatnot, it was definitely leads you to more things. And we'll get into this in a moment. I don't get on a big tangent, but you're asking about what other blowback happened. Another big thing happened. Yeah. My old job, I was actually harassed by a former agent's good friend. He was attempting to write the CEO of my company to try to get me in trouble with my job, saying, hey, this guy's very unpatriotic. He's writing things very unpatriotic about this country and about some of my comrades. What are you going to do about this? It backfired on him. They said they were going to have legal action against him for harassment if he ever contacted them again. And luckily the CEO never read it because they always screen his mail. But the point is, look at that. Isn't that amazing? You think 50 years later, get a life, Oswald Attalone, there's nothing to this. And here's these instances right there off the top of my head of them tampering, them threatening, them, either covertly or overtly doing things to try to upset the apple cart, to try to get me either in trouble or to stop my research because I was onto something. And one more thing on that note was everybody's familiar with Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine, especially Clint Hill. He's the agent who famously jumped on the back of the limousine in Dallas to try to do something after the shots happened or whatnot. Well, he's come out with several books. He has another book coming out in May. When I contacted him out of the blue in the summer of 2005, he had no books. He was in hiding, other than talking to 60 Minutes in 1975 and talking to William Manchester. A lot of people don't even remember that. That's all he ever did. And I got his private address and phone number from a former agent. Another mind-blowing incident. I couldn't believe this guy was giving me his private address. It was unlisted. I got to tell people that's unlisted. It wasn't like, oh, Vince, other people contacted Clint. How do you know you're not the only one? I know based on the fact he had unlisted phone number, unlisted address, and his reaction to me. I sent him, again, I was so bold, I sent him a 22-page letter, which was like a cliff notes of my then work in progress. And my basic thrust of the letter was, Clint, you shouldn't blame yourself. Your superiors were trying to blame Kennedy for not having you on the back of the car and whatnot, and not having some of these security measures invoked, that they handicapped you, they hampered you, and it's not your fault, it's some of your supervisors' faults. And he was livid with me. He tried to pretend he can get the letter, even though you have a signed receipt, he got the letter. And then lo and behold, in the woodwork, I'm hearing, wait, Gerald Blaine, his good friend since the 50s, is coming out with a book called The Kennedy Detail? What? It's on the biggest publisher in the world, Simon & Schuster. What? These guys were fly fishing in Colorado and Virginia. They were totally retired. In fact, if anything, books were like the Antichrist of that. They even were proud. I would never write my book. I would never sell out for any money. And these guys were in their late 70s at the time. They're early 80s now. And they never had any inkling of writing a book until, again, it just is what it is, until I upset the apple cart and they started to look at the internet, started to see what I had to write. They didn't know I was coming out with a book at the time until later. And they started to see this thing. In fact, even Gerald Blaine even admitted in an interview, he started his book in the summer of 2005 when I sent my letter to Clint Hill, his good friend. After I started to see so many things on the internet trying to cast aspersions against some of my colleagues, I said, enough is enough. And Clint Hill is on record on C-SPAN. He said, I destroyed all my personal notes. And Brian Lamb asked him, when did you destroy your private your notes? He goes, let me think. Probably 2005. Gee, I wonder why. They probably thought, oh my God, this guy's going to start a congressional investigation. Oh my God, this young idiot, he's going to get everybody looking at us again. We can't do that. We got to protect the agency. So they came out with a book and they were blaming Kennedy. It was so crass, so overdone. Even people that aren't even aware of my research were saying, wait a minute, that'll protest is too much. These guys are saying that Kennedy ordered them off the car, was real vociferous, and because Kennedy ordered them off the car, that's the reason why the assassination happened. They're squeaky clean. They had nothing to do with anything, and it was all on the president, not on them. Really crass. It's like blame the victim times 10 the book. It was overdone, and he even mentions me with that, naming me, calls me a self-described Secret Service expert in a best-selling book, and Clint Hill came with his books trying to do the same thing, and it was all I created a cottage industry for these gentlemen. So that's basically what it boils down to summarize. It was like a warfare of ideas. 50 years later, people could say, oh, what could we talk about? What can we get into? Everybody has these theories about what happened to Kennedy, blah, blah, blah. You'll never know the truth. Well, I'll say this. That may or may not be true, but I'll say this. It's still an active warfare of ideas when you got former agents writing books trying to blame the president because little old me, Vince Palamara, wrote to them out of the blue and scared the heck out of them, scared them into action to write these books and to make up these lies, make up meetings that never happened, made up dialogue that never happened. And in case you're saying, well, those are bold charges, Vince, how are you backing this up? How I'm backing this up is I had these guys on tape or in letters or both telling me years before these gentlemen's books came out. President Kennedy never ordered him off the car, never ordered him to do anything. Sam Kennedy, the driver of the follow-up car in Dallas and elsewhere, told me he was solely responsible for the bubble top's removal. Kennedy had nothing to do with it. He told me 3 times, 3 different occasions, okay? He was adamant Kennedy had nothing to do with it. By the way, Sam Kennedy believed there was a conspiracy. He thought Oswald was a sole shooter. Interesting, he thought there was a conspiracy, though. But more importantly, to the point, he was like, Kennedy never was. He was one of the nicest presidents ever to protect. A lot of this time, they always compare him to Truman. A lot of the agents say, oh, he was just like Truman. Kennedy never interfered with us at all. Whatever you guys want is the way it will be. And again, that onus comes back to the Secret Service. And I'm a big fan of the Secret Service. It's not a witch hunt. I may be a harsh critic of November 22nd, but I'm a big fan of the agency, 1865 to the present. In fact, Robert DeProspero, the former #1 agent under Reagan, contacted me out of the blue a few years ago and said, I'm paraphrasing, I'm a big fan of your work. I like the way you tell it like it is, and we've become friends since then. I'm an associate producer of a forthcoming documentary on the guy. This guy's one of my fans. He's the guy who protected President Reagan for 3 years, #1 agent. So I have my friends. I have my enemies, too, in the agency, but I have my friends, too. And, because it is what it is. I always tell people, have your Oswald in the window if you want. If you want to be a jerk about it, if you're one of those people who think Oswald acted alone, have Oswald in the window. This could have been prevented and should have been prevented. And another thing I'll get into, beyond, blaming the president for it, some major discovery of mine was, and I found it by accident going through newspaper archives and whatnot, and that began it, that during the FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy administration, before the assassination, building rooftops were regularly guarded. It wasn't just for the inaugural. It was a matter of regular course that the building rooftops were guarded by the sheriff's department, local police agents, or all the above. So I'm like, wait a minute now. Why wasn't this invoked in Dallas? And I brought this up because I found a document came out late 1990s. The Tampa, Florida trip Kennedy took 4 days before Dallas. It was 28 miles long. It was like something like 5 or 6 times longer than Kennedy's motorcade in Dallas. It was much longer. And they had multi-story building rooftops guarded by the sheriff's department. They couldn't afford to do that in a much shorter motorcade in Dallas. But it turns out Gerald Blaine of the Kennedy Detail fame, the author of the Kennedy Detail, wrote this report. And he was asked about it because little old me brought it up. And Larry Sabato, probably a lot of people know Larry Sabato. He's been on CNN a lot talking about the 2016 election. Well, he also wrote a book called The Kennedy Half Century, a best-selling book on the assassination. He interviewed Gerald Blaine about this, thanks to little old me and my blog at the time. And Gerald Blaine said something really lame. He said, well, we didn't have the manpower in Dallas to watch the buildings. I'm like, wait. You had the manpower in Tampa to watch a much longer motorcade. You had the sheriff's department guarding every multi-story building. You didn't have the manpower to do it in a much shorter motorcade in Dallas. And you got the precedent again. FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and pre-Dallas, they were watching buildings. And to explain for your listeners how this worked is, this is why you got to always be careful about still photos and whatnot. Somebody could Google an image and say, hey, Vince, explain yourself here, pal. I don't see a lot of overt protection for President Kennedy on this trip. I don't see agents around the car. I don't see a lot of overt protection. Explain yourself. Here's how I explain myself. There's no doubt that the Secret Service had manpower issues in 1963. There was only like 300-some agents the whole wide world at the time. And the White House details approximately 36 agents. They relied on local police, military, and whatnot, the sheriff's department. But how they got around this was they had multi-story building rooftops guarded. They watched the speed of the car. They had motorcycles around the car. They had a good intelligence finding out in advance if there was any threat to the president. If the car's going 30 miles an hour, building rooftops are guarded, there's no such thing as 100% protection, but it'd be 50 times better than what happened in Dallas when he's going 11 miles an hour or less and building rooftops unguarded. No one's around the car, no motorcycles around the car, no bubble top. I mean, the list goes on. That's why I wrote a book, because there's much more than that. But that's basically what it boils down to. It was like a really electrifying moment. I found all these newspaper articles from FDR to JFK where they're saying, police are going to monitor the rooftops of buildings, whatnot, during the downtown parade. And I found official documents saying the same thing. Well, I spoke. This is really the coup d'etat here. I spoke to, or coup de grace.
Coup de grace.
Coup d'etat, whatever.
Slip of the tongue.
Michael Torina was the chief inspector of the Secret Service. Michael Torina is the gentleman who wrote the Secret Service manual. By the way, all these statements I'm saying are documented in my books. You don't have to take my word for it. Go to my book. It's all heavily documented. You can go to the exact book or document or interview. A lot of the stuff is available online as well to back up what I'm saying. Again, this is the guy who wrote the Secret Service manual, chief inspector of the Secret Service. If anybody in the world would know proper security, this gentleman was. Well, in 1962, a long out-of-print book, very long out-of-print, probably only lasted a year or two, a book called What Does a Secret Service Agent Do? It was made for young adults and whatnot. Well, he contributed heavily to the book. And on a page of the book, it says, matter of factly, whenever the president is in a motorcade, agents or police guard the roofs of buildings. I'm like, whoa, this is even more corroboration. I spoke to him, and he didn't get any detail. He just confirmed the veracity of that statement. In other words, he confirmed that was true. He didn't say, oh, that's wrong, or I was misquoted. He confirmed that. He's just confirming what all the other newspaper articles and reports say. There's a couple photos I found, because a lot of times, keep in mind, the focus of the photographs are on the president. They're not on multi-story buildings, but I've caught a couple photographs where you can see actual police officers standing on rooftops. Russell Groover was a motorcycle policeman on that Tampa motorcade I talked about. It was 28 miles long, much longer in Dallas. He confirmed to me in email and on the phone that, here's how we protected Kennedy in Tampa. That we drove at a very fast rate of speed, so one-story buildings were okay. One-story buildings were guarded because we had the military police or regular police watching the buildings from the street. They weren't watching Kennedy. They were looking at the buildings, and the cars were going fast. When they went to the downtown area of Tampa, all of those multi-story buildings were guarded by the sheriff's department. So, and then also they had men on the back of the car, too. But I just wanted to, for the audience, just think about that for a second. My God, in Dallas, there wouldn't have been any assassination. Even if you believe, I always take devil's advocate. Even if it was Lee Harvey Oswald, he's there, if it's Mannlicher Carpenter getting ready for action, they would have spotted him. The motorcade would have been aborted. He would have been shot or captured, killed, whatever. But the bottom line, if these men would have been there, and it gets the onus comes back to the Secret Service. And I'm torn. People ask me, do you think it's a sinister? Do you think it was just negligence? I'm torn. It actually depends on my mood. I'm a very open-minded person. I go back and forth on this, whether this was on purpose or this was some tragic accident, and they covered up for it afterward. Keep in mind, America was a very innocent country, naive country in 1963. It was before the Vietnam War became a war, before Watergate, before distrust in politics. Average kid said, I want to be president, I want to be an astronaut, whatnot. So when the government's saying it's Lee Harvey Oswald act alone, that's it. And when they're also saying that President Kennedy told the agents not to do certain things, well, most people are going to believe that. Who in the right mind would question that? Say, well, the president didn't want them there. Another major discovery of mine was I found out there's no
wait. I tell you what, Vince, before you get
even saying that.
Before you get into the next discovery, because we got to take a commercial break.
Oh, okay, yeah, we'll get back to that.
Yeah, and I forgot to tell you too, off the air, that it's a 6-minute long break, and again, we won't be able to talk to each other. And if you talk, they'll hear you talking.
No problem.
But when we get back, I want to ask you, because you keep bringing up the Florida motorcade. Now, wasn't there, or the reason there was so much extra security on that Florida motorcade is because there was the police got a really great confidential informant telling them that there was a plot to kill Kennedy during that Florida trip?
That's definitely part of it.
Okay,
yep.
So we'll touch on that as soon as we get back. We'll be back with more of Vince Palamara, a walking encyclopedia. I love this, man. I can just sit back and listen to this all day long. It's great stuff. The latest book is From Parkland to Bethesda, The Ultimate Kennedy Assassination Compendium. Now, prior to that, he wrote the book Survivor's Guilt, The Secret Service and the Failure to Protect President Kennedy. And then coming up in about a year, the Not-So-Secret Service, Agency Tales from FDR to the Kennedy Assassination to the Reagan Era. coming out in 2017. And people with sharp ears listening to Vincent talk about his experience with the Secret Service might recall my personal experience with the Secret Service, which was identical. My mail getting broken into. So, identical situation, okay? So we'll be right back after this with more of Vince Palamara. Great guest. We'll be right back after this. Thank you, Vince.
Thanks.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly, quarterly, or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections with documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to oppermanreport.com and you can sign up there tonight. You can start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that you heard them here on the Opperman Report. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Duffy soon. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace your spouse's email address back to internet dating websites to catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves the New World Mexican Women, and their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalone stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him without telling her family. You can find the New World Mexican Women by Googling New World Mexican Women. And you can ask them about their deals on wholesaling their fine jewelry and all of the other projects that they have going on. If you'd like to have your business or website advertised here and promoted all over the world on dozens of stations every day, give us a call at 800-572-9762 or email oppermanreport@gmail.com. And now back to our show. Well, not so soon. First, we're going to talk about MichiganMushrooms.net. They offer the highest quality chaga chunks available anywhere, picked fresh from healthy live trees in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, sun-dried and quickly shipped to you. They're very proud of their long-standing reputation as trusted farmers and collectors of wild, gourmet, and medicinal mushrooms. Customer service and offering high-quality products is very important to them. And they have a strict grading system that begins in the woods, and they would rather pass up a chunk that looks bad instead of passing it off to you, the customer. Additionally, they are recognized by the state of Michigan as mushroom experts. They are certified by the Department of Agriculture to sell 20 different species of mushrooms, and proof of this certification is available upon request. That is MichiganMushrooms.net or on Facebook, Michigan Mushrooms LLC. Got a brand new sponsor, The Rodeo of Doom by Miguel La Sala. The year is 2384, and Henry Fields is a down-on-his-luck adjunct professor in the architecture department at Andreas Tangen University in Los Angeles. But he has one thing going for him that others don't. He has enough of the coveted EP14 to live to be 200, if he wants to. Not that hard. When he saves a woman for certain death with a few drops of the EP14, a corrupt government agency tries to blackmail him into selling off his supply. Just when it seems like it might be a good idea, all hell breaks loose. The Rodeo of Doom was written by Miguel La Sala and edited by Margaret A. Harrell, the author of Keep This Quiet, memoir series. Now, she was also the copy-edited Hunter S. Thompson's breakthrough book, Hell's Angels. According to Harrell, the Rodeo of Doom will grip you and pull you into the wild ride of a different reality. This is a consciously fast-paced journey into the future. Author Miguel La Sala reveals his craft by intricately weaving in fine details for his reader and keeps you anxiously anticipating what will happen next. Do not wait to read this book. There will surely be more to come from this author. The Rodeo of Doom is available on Amazon.com, and there's a link to the Rodeo of Doom in the Opperman Report bookstore. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and we're here with Vincent Palamara, JFK from Parkland to Bethesda, The Ultimate Kennedy Assassination Compendium, and also to his previous book was, scroll down here a bit, Survivor's Guilt, The Secret Service and the Failure to Protect President Kennedy, and the next one coming up in about a year, The Not-So-Secret Service, Agency Tales from FDR to the Kennedy Assassination. Now, Vince, if you like what you're hearing from Vince right now, he's got a blog spot, vincepalamara.blogspot.com. He's also got a YouTube channel, Vince Palamara, and YouTube user Vince Palamara, and IMDb page. What were we on TV a couple of times, Vince?
Oh yeah, several times. Yeah, the Men Who Killed Kennedy, C-SPAN, credits on a couple of shows for Discovery Channel and whatnot. Yeah, and I got 3 documentaries that are done and just waiting for them to come out on DVD. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So now, when we left off, we were talking about the Florida informant down there that had a very credible informant.
Yes. Yeah, I'll pick up where we left off. Okay, yeah. So this, again, 28-mile motorcades. This is the major trip before Texas was the one to Florida. We went to Cape Canaveral, Miami, and Tampa. And, again, there was threats. In fact, there were 6 pages worth of threats. A lot of this, keep in mind, only came out in the late 1990s because little old me, ordered the documents in the archives. At the time, they were a couple $100. And I would dare say out of the billions of people on this planet, how many people were going to, A, know about these documents, and B, fork over a couple $100 to get the copies of the documents? And as far as I know, I might have been the only one that I know of, but that's another story. But then more importantly, this Tampa trip and Miami trip as well, both these trips, we'll talk about both, it's 6 long pages of names of threats to the president. A couple were actually specific, talking about, like the shooter when he goes to the downtown motorcade, blah, 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 and like a lot of specific names, whereas you get to Dallas, there wasn't any of those names. That's why chapter 2 of my book, I go into that, and I'll allude to that in a moment. But again, somebody can make the case, well, the reason why he had so much protection in Tampa, fair enough, is because of these threats. There was a lot of threats. And he gets to Dallas, the overt story, the official story is, despite the president himself saying we're heading to nut country now, despite several people warning the president not to go to Dallas, one of them being Senator William Fulbright, and there was other famous ones. Pretty much everybody knows, but no one disputes this either by either side of the argument. It was, I concede that Dallas was a dangerous place. John Birch Society, the wanted for treason signs, the welcome Mr. Kennedy to Dallas black border ad, where they're saying all these treasonous, hateful things about Kennedy. and it's right-wing Dallas Nun-Country, the presidents that were in the Nun-Country, they find not one person who has a threat against the president. We're supposed to believe that. And I say chapter 2 of my book, Survivor's Guilt, the reason why that was done, even Roy Kellerman, under oath to the Warren Commission, told Gerald Ford, who at the time was a Warren Commission member, yes, that was unusual. He didn't find any threats. I think the reason why that was done was that was another cover story. They could say, hey, we didn't have all this overt for protection for the president. We didn't find any threats. I think they did find threats. And again, this is why I'm on the fence whether this is sinister or negligence. Either they find the threats, didn't act upon it, and they covered this up afterwards, or it was done on purpose to eliminate any kind of advantage of security that, oh, yeah, we didn't find any threats. Meantime, they did, but I'm not going to let you know that. And there you go. And couple major discoveries that I was alluding to for the commercial break. This goes right in hand in glove of Tampa and the security he got versus the security he did not receive in Dallas. I discovered a major covert monitoring of threats to the president. Now, this name is going to be familiar to people that are in the know who have read books. His name's Glenn Bennett. Yeah. Glenn Bennett was an agent riding in the follow-up car. And again, this only came out in the late 1990s about the background of Mr. Bennett. Okay, you might say, okay, so what, Vince? It's the name of an agent in the follow-up car. What's so great about that? Well, he was actually an agent from the intelligence division of the Secret Service. These were guys, it was a desk job. They monitored, back then really wasn't computers, so it was more like index cards of police reports and threats and whatnot. Whenever the president, for example, would go to Philadelphia, New York, and whatnot, they would say, hey, Glenn, check the files. Is there any nutcases, any conspiracies, anything about the president? If there are, we got to investigate this. We got to at least make sure this guy's watching as the motorcade passes. Well, this guy, all of a sudden, Glenn Bennett, he's actually in physical motorcades. It gets much worse. That's the reason why I wrote a whole chapter on Glenn Bennett and his one associate. Well, not only is he on the Dallas trip, you might say that's an isolated incident, maybe it was manpower, that was one of the excuses used. He was on all the stops in Florida, and he was on all the stops in New York City right before the assassination. This is where it gets interesting. He lies under oath to the Haas Select Committee. They interviewed him. Again, these documents only came out in the late 1990s. He says, I was not on the Florida trip. Meantime, these documents come out, and pictures have come out. Since I know what he looks like now, in 2013, finally found out 2 years ago what the gentleman actually looks like, a good picture of him. It's like, my God, you can actually see photos of him in Tampa. He's walking beside the presidential limousine. He's riding on the follow-up car. So he lies under oath about being on the Florida trip when he was on every single trip. And this was only 15 years later. You can't say it's amnesia and it's 50 years later. Maybe the guy's mistaken. No, this was only 15 years after. And he was represented by a Secret Service lawyer during his little interview. I guess maybe he was worried, like, oh, I got to have my attorney with me in case they ask me a question. But he lied. He point blank lied, and he was on all these trips, and he was riding in the FOB car. You might say, okay, he's lying. He's on all these trips. What's this mean? What this means was he joins the White House detail from PRS right past mid-November because the Secret Service had multiple mortal threats against President Kennedy, and they wanted Glenn on these motorcades to monitor them. And guess what? The president's brutally assassinated, and they covered up not only their negligence, they covered up the fact that he was there as a covert monitor. Can you imagine if John Q. Citizen would have knew, even in 1963-64, wait a minute, you had a Secret Service agent who was specifically there to monitor threats, that you knew of threats in advance, and he's killed under your watch. That's why it was so important to say Oswald Adelone was a nutcase, it was a quirk of fate, a man in a building shot a man in a car. And that was also why it was very important that the dead president was blamed for his lack of security, because it makes sense. Hey, the Secret Service, they're saying that he didn't want this protection next. So that's why people got off the ball and started getting their little theories and ghosts on the grassy knoll, because that gets everybody in a tailspin, like Donald Sutherland's character in JFK says. It becomes like a parlor game. Who shot the president? It goes, it spins its wheels. It's very inconclusive because you can't really prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But in my opinion, you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the president should have been protected better. It was negligence or worse. And again, you could go prior precedent of trips. And Glenn Bennett's, and before we can catch your breath about Glenn Bennett's, his presence on these trips, they're lying about it, he's lying about it, and the president's killed. They're not saying what he's done. Clint Hill, a little slip up in his book. That's why it's harder to cover up the lie than it is the truth. Because you're telling the truth, you don't have to worry about cover-ups. You're just going to free and just say anything comes out of your mouth. Well, in his 2012 book, Mrs. Kennedy and Me, he says Glenn Bennett was in Dallas monitoring intelligence. I'm like, oh, really? Because the official story is he was just another agent. He wasn't there as an intelligence guy. They just needed manpower, and that's he was there. Clint Hill, it was a best-selling book, and people don't realize what a smoking gun that is. Wow. He's also confirming he was there as an intelligence agent. Well, I discovered another agent that was on that trip. He was on the Austin trip. That was the trip that Kennedy would have lived if he would have got his head blown off in Dallas. They were heading to Austin. Agent called Howard K. Norton was definitely on that trip. There's no doubt about it. Again, late 1990s, these Secret Service survey reports came out for the trip that he was going to make to Austin, Secret Service, and duly noted is the name Norton. I spoke to one of his colleagues. At the time, I only had the last name Norton. Who's this Norton? And Dale Wunderlich was an agent in the intelligence division. Oh, that's Howard K. Norton. He's the agent who was famous. He found the resonance cavity in the United Nations where the Russians were trying to bug us, and we found the bug thanks to that old Howard K. Norton. Well, other agents I spoke to all had amnesia. Told me, I don't remember a Howard Norton. No, I never heard of him. Never heard of him at all. No one can remember him other than Dale Wunderlich. And then I contacted the Secret Service, the current living, breathing Secret Service. They have no tenure dates for a Howard K. Norton. And it gets even worse. The former Agents Association, all you have to be is a member of the agency for 1 year, and you're a member for life. That's it, you're a member. Gerald O'Rourke was on that trip to Texas. He says, I don't remember a Howard K. Norton. Vince, if he would have been a member of the Secret Service for at least a year, trust me, he'd be on our roster because that's the way it is. Living or dead, we have a record of him. I don't remember this Howard K. Norton. Yet there's no doubt that, A, his name is on the trip, no doubt he was an intelligence agent, and no doubt Dale Wunderlich, an associate, went to great and glorious detail who he was, even provided his middle initial, and asked the other question. No, I never was able to locate him. I don't know if this is the common name, but the gentleman died. He was kept under wraps. But again, oh my God, they had another intelligence agent on that trip to Texas. So we're supposed to believe that little old Kennedy, this rendezvous with death, his favorite poem. Meantime, we all have a rendezvous with death. We're not immortal. We're all going to die someday. But JFK loved this poem, and he went to Texas. He didn't want the bubble top. He didn't want those agents screening him in the back of the car and all this nonsense, all this crap. And then we're also not told that we had intelligence agents on the trip from the Secret Service covertly monitoring mortal threats. So there was a lot more than Oswald out there, folks. And he gets his head blown off in Dallas with this horrible security, horrible lack of intelligence, and supposedly the story is they found no threats.
Yeah, but Vince,
I don't believe it's bunk.
Now stop and think of this. Stop and think of this. Now you're the intelligence officer, right? So you know all these threats. Oswald, being a defector to and from Russia, had to be on that list.
Exactly.
Now listen, you're riding in the car. You got to say, hey, you know what? One of these guys lives right up here. He works right up in this building, right here.
Right.
As you're driving under it, because all these addresses are in your head. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the funny thing is that when you look at the Alkins photo, the famous black and white photo of Elm Street where Kennedy's arms are splayed towards his throat, it's before the fatal headshot. It's a pretty famous photo. I think everybody knows. That's the man in the doorway photo where people think it's Oswald, turns out to be Billy Lovelady. But anyway, Glenn Bennett in the file car is looking right at the Texas School Book Depository. No one else is. He's looking right smack dab at that building when the shooting began. It's almost as if he knew, again, this is speculation. My God, the shots are coming from that building, or at least some of the shots. Now, it opens up a can of worms because not only did Sam Kinney believe there's a conspiracy, Sam Kinney, matter of fact, he said, the back of the president's head blew off. I had that piece of the back of the president's head on the C-130, head back to the autopsy, in Maryland, blah, blah, blah. Paul Landis said, in two reports, the shots came from the front. Dave Powers, loyal Kennedy aide, had the feeling they were heading into an ambush, and Powers and O'Donnell both said the shots came from the front, but to Tip O'Neill, but it did not to get off.
Oh, I think I'm losing you. Okay.
Good, but good. There was another major discovery I can get into if you want to, real quick, about presidential security.
Well, let's talk about this because we only have 9 minutes left. Can you give me another half hour?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I knew you would, man. You love talking about this stuff. Okay, great. It would probably be harder for me to stop you, right? If the show is over. Okay, now, what were you just about to say?
Oh, no, real quick. I'll make this very short.
Yeah.
Again, what I said before commercial break is most people would think, it's very logical to think on its face that, hey, the president's the boss. He's the one who tells the security, I don't want this done, I don't want that done. You're just a little old agent. Most people, 99% of people say, that sounds plausible to me. It turns out it's not true, and I go into great detail in the new book that's coming out next year, and I went into a decent amount of detail in the first book about this, but it turns out it's not true. An article came out in the Associated Press that was in many newspapers around the country, November 15, 1963, a week before the assassination. It says the Secret Service could overrule even the president where his personal security is involved. I found so much corroboration for that. Even President Truman's on record saying the Secret Service is the only boss the President of the United States really has. Lyndon Johnson also quoted that President Truman little sentence about Secret Service security. Chief Huey Bauman was the Secret Service director before JFK, says in his book, the president knew that by law we called the shots when it comes to security. The list goes on. There's just an all where buildings normally watch. The Secret Service was the one. Like Clint Hill, this is amazing. Again, it's harder to keep the lie under than is the truth. Clint Hill, in a 2010 sixth floor oral history, and again, his video is not available commercially. You have to order it and whatnot. It's not for copies or whatnot. He says that the president can tell you what he wants done, but what we used to do is listen to the president, then we did what we wanted to anyway. So that's the real truth right there. Not what they're trying this malarkey. They have their books now trying to blame Kennedy. Even if hypothetically he did not, but even if hypothetically Kennedy said, I don't want you gentlemen there, they would have did what they wanted to anyway. You want more proof? Clint Hill rode on the back of the car briefly in Main Street, which is a block before the assassination site. Oh, I thought the Kennedy didn't want you there. I thought he ordered you off the limousine, Clint. Uh-oh, doesn't realize the contradiction, still doesn't. He's on the rear of the car. I thought Kennedy didn't want you there. He also doesn't realize the contradiction of saying over and over again through the decades that the back of the president's head's gone. That indicates a shot from the front, but he doesn't get that. Just like Governor Connolly to his dying day never understood that being shot by a separate bullet means that there was two shooters. See, these guys are compartmentalized. They're so ingrained in their brains that the government couldn't be involved, there's no conspiracy, and getting that across to people that sometimes they don't realize what they're saying and doing goes against official history, and that's what it's all about. But it took little old me to upset the apple cart. Oh, another thing I forgot to leave out too was another threat I received is Gerald Blaine. A year before his book came out, I got a letter from his lawyer telling me basically to take down my blog, that I'm trying to insinuate that I had a hand in his book. And I'm like, wait a minute, no, I'm not. I'm just advertising his forthcoming book. But it was like a shot across the bow. It was very silly. It was like they're trying to scare me into submission that maybe I'd take down my blog and go away. As before my book came out, it really shocked the heck out of them. They were not expecting little old me to come out with a book. But I was like a flying on the internet and influencing people because they were realizing there's another story. In fact, you can even see it on Gerald Blaine's Amazon reviews. A lot of people quote from me. I read Vince Palamara's website. I read Vince Palamara's book. So at least my word's getting out there. People are realizing that, wait a minute now. There's two sides to every story here, and this isn't jiving. And I think it's very tragic because not only do we have the loss of the president and all this character assassination about him sleeping around and whatnot that may or may not be true, but it's no excuse for his murder. But now we got the Secret Service agents trying to blame him for his own assassination by falsely blaming him for lack of security. They blame him for not having the motorcycles beside him, which is total bunk. He had tons of motorcycles around him in Houston, San Antonio, and Fort Worth right before the assassination. It goes on and on. The level of just excuses and just blaming the victim is outrageous. So, yeah.
Well, I can tell you this. Just was it yesterday or the day before? Yeah, it was the day before. I was covering the Hillary Clinton campaign stop here at the rally here in Nevada.
Ooh,
okay. Oh, yeah. And it was delayed. It was delayed a couple hours because the Secret Service was in there clearing the building. And the Secret Service, they are definitely more in control of the event than the campaign staff and even the candidate who's the ex-wife, the wife, ex-wife, who knows? But the wife of a former president. They don't seem to live together. The only time they're together is when they're running for president. So, yeah, the Secret Service is totally in charge of all that stuff. Beyond. And also, too, yeah, even with press credentials and stuff like that, I'm sure if they recognize my name, they wouldn't let me in. If I was considered a threat or whatever, you can't get in. So they're more in charge of it than the candidate themselves.
Right.
Okay, I tell you what. Okay, let's take a break now. We're going to do another half hour with Vince Palamara from JFK to Parkland. JFK from Parkland to Bethesda, the Ultimate Kennedy Assassination Compendium, and the other books are Survivor's Guilt, The Secret Service, and the Failure to Protect President Kennedy. And coming up is the Not So Secret Service. Agency tales from FDR to the Kennedy assassination. And there's so much to talk about with the Secret Service. So it's a real amazing stuff that goes on with these guys. VincePalamara.blogspot.com and on YouTube, Vince Palamara. Now, when we get back, what I want to ask you And I love the way you do everybody's voices when you talk about these people arguing with you. Yeah, I love that part. But let's get into Parkland to Bethesda. The differences between what's in the reports at Parkland and then what we see later on at Bethesda. Because I think that,
good.
Yeah, that would be dramatic. Okay, let's get back. Yeah, after these messages here.
Okay.
Okay. And Vince will do all the voices too when we get back. Okay. All right back after these messages here. And now a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly, quarterly, or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections with documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to oppermanreport.com and you can sign up there tonight. You can start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that you heard them here on the Opperman Report. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Duffy soon. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace your spouse's email address back to internet dating websites to catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves the New World Mexican Women, and their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalone stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him. Okay, well, all right. That's the end of part one of the segment with Vince Palamara about his work with JFK and the Secret Service. I can admit when I make a mistake, okay? And I made a little bit of a mistake tonight because what happened was I had the interview with William Matson Law earlier today, and it was only a 1-hour segment because I had so many things I had to get done today. And then I said, well, okay, because he mentioned Vincent Palamara in the interview, so I said, well, I'll use that. I pulled it out of the members section, I put that on. I thought it was a 1-hour segment, but it was a 2-hour segment. So if you want to hear the rest of Vincent Palamara, you can go to the members section at oppermanreport@gmail.com. No, it's oppermanreport.com. And there's a special archive section where you can buy shows. You can review all the shows that we have in the members section. And you could buy it one by one. You could buy that show for like $2. Maybe I'll reduce the price since I made this mistake and got everybody all on the edge of their seats to hear the second half of Vincent Palamara. But looking at the chat room, people don't seem too interested. I think we did kind of stretch that interview out. with Vincent. But a great guest and a great show, and I really appreciate the William Matson Law this morning coming on at the last second. It's been a crazy week. Okay, got some big news for you, too. Right now there is a protest on the Las Vegas Strip. Tonight is 9/9/2016, and it is 7 p.m., and there's a huge protest down on the Strip for the Standing Rock Sioux. There's over 200 people down there, so this is one of our most successful rallies we've had out there. It's being led by Melissa Freya-Score. Maybe we can get her to call in later on and give us an update on what's going on out there. But from the pictures I saw, it's the biggest crowd we've had so far. We do these out in front of the Bellagio. So pretty soon, they're going to not let us do protests there anymore. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to start my live portion of the show. Give me a second here to get started. Everybody who's listening on Spreaker, please reboot.